Hello, welcome to Brainscapers with Brooks and Roots. I'm Roots. Today we're back at a garden that we were at earlier this spring that you may remember was full of spring flowering bulbs. Lots of different tulip varieties, camassia, all sorts of just beautiful spring color. Well, now we're in August and the garden has transformed to mostly perennials and also the annuals, flowers that you're seeing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different annuals, some of the cool things that have happened as this garden's developed, and then I'll show you some maintenance tips as well to help keep your garden in good shape for the summertime. So welcome again. So we're going to start here. I'm going to start with this little blue plant. This is ageratum. It's an annual ageratum. So every year that gets put in a, like a 4 or 6 inch pot. Great summer color, great combination color with yellows and oranges. They just work perfectly together. But the really cool thing about this plant, if you look over here, this is the crop of seedlings that came in from last year's planting. So imagine that bed being planted with the small individual plants, and all of that ageratum has reseeded, and so now it's come up as basically a perennial or just a reseeding annual, and it's formed this beautiful ribbon of color border for this garden. So this, where normally he would replant annuals every year, now he doesn't have to with the ageratum. There's another plant that I'll show you in just a few minutes that did the same thing. So you're kind of getting twice the bang for your buck when you plant some of these things that have a chance to reseed. So with this garden, what you're seeing are, well, I guess this is probably a better representation. The orange is a profusion zinnia, as are the little yellow guys. They also come in a pink, kind of a cherry colored one. But these guys are just great. They're very low maintenance, bloom for a super long time, add tons of color to the garden. And also the pollinators love this garden. There's so many different varieties of things going on that there's all sorts of, besides honeybees, bumblebees, lots of other pollinators. I'm just seeing flying and landing on everything. So with that, when you're trying to encourage pollinators to your garden, the more variety you add, the better. It's just like with hummingbirds. If you're going to try to bring hummingbirds in, have multiple areas of red flowers, your hummingbird feeders, so that they have different plants to visit and different food sources. Tall garden phlox we've got on the other side of the garden over here. I'll just kind of shoot over here for a second. This one has been a great one to bring the hummingbirds in and also the butterflies. Another nice thing about this, it is a perennial, but disregard the weeds. It's kind of in the process of being weeded. But these seed heads, as they dry out towards the end of summer, you can collect those seed heads and then move them to an area where you want to propagate this and have more of them come up next year. So if you have a big prairie garden, for instance, you can take these seed heads, dry them, and then crush the seed late in the fall, spread it all over, and you'll get new babies that come up. You can also do division by dividing the root. But with as prolific as the seed is, it's the perfect thing to do with that plant. I'm going to go back over to a garden over here, and I'll show you about how to cut back daylilies to get them to rebloom. There are a lot of folks that don't realize the reblooming daylilies will continue to bloom at least a couple of cycles through the season just by giving them a good haircut. If you don't give them a good haircut, I'll show you in just a minute what they look like. And it's also the reason a lot of people tend not to plant them in their garden, because they just don't look good this time of year if they haven't had some maintenance to them. So I'll grab my pruners and then we'll move over to this garden. One of the things that comes up just about every day in my work world is, how do I get a low maintenance garden but color? Well, there's no such thing as no maintenance unless you just have a lawn, but you still have to mow that, so that's not no maintenance. But there are plants in the landscape that are what I consider low maintenance. A lot of people request when we do their gardens not to put daylilies in because this time of year they look pretty ratty. Well, they look ratty because they haven't been cut back. The trick with these guys, these are a variety of rebloomers, happy returns. This variety of daylilies is one of the reblooming daylilies. That just means if they're maintained, they will rebloom multiple times during the season. In an ideal situation, these would have been cut back right after their initial blooming. So with the reblooming daylilies, ideally these would have been cut back after the first bloom time, which basically is around the 4th of July. So if you can put it on your calendar for next year and you have any of the rebloomers, around the 4th of July, after they're done, after the big burst of color's done, these are my favorite tools ever, one of my favorite tools. All you need to do is come in, cut them back to the ground. You basically want to get rid of all of this old weedy growth. There's some grass growing in behind it, of course, because you can't see it because of the daylilies. Clip all this dead, ratty stuff off. Pull the weeds while you're at it. And I like to get them pretty consistent, just because it looks better. So basically what I would do is go through and cut all of these back at the same time. What you're going to see in about a week to 10 days, new foliage will come up from the center of the plant. It'll turn back into a nice lush green plant. And then by the time we get to the 2 to 3 week mark, then you'll be back to a really nice foliage plant and rebloom. So had this been done in early July, you could have cut them back, say the end of August, early September, cut them back again, and they would rebloom again for you until frost. So if you have other daylilies in your garden that are not the rebloomers, they're kind of like the old-fashioned orange ones, the ditch lilies that bloom once, they still tend to look ratty after they bloom. With those, you can do the same thing. You can cut all the foliage to the ground and clean them up, and then that'll allow new foliage to come up. Those will not rebloom, but at least it'll give your garden a clean look. So that's a little bit of a tip for daylilies. I'm going to move over to another plant that does a similar thing to what the ageratum did. The ageratum came back from seed. This is actually a tuber or kind of a bulb that you would plant. And it also is winter hardy enough that it has come back on its own without having to be dug up in the fall. So we'll move over here. So the plant you're seeing right here, this guy, who's also down here, up here, kind of all over the place, this is a dahlia. Dahlias typically are not winter hardy in Southwest Ohio. However, if you put a good layer of mulch on, a lot of times they can come up. I just don't guarantee or rely on the fact that they're going to come back up from year to year. So usually we lift these in the fall, store them in a garage. With that, we'll take them and, let me throw that down. We'll take them and dig them up, put them in a pot, and then just store the pot inside. As long as they don't freeze, they'll come back up in the spring, transplant them back into your garden, so you can use your same dahlias year after year. The funny thing about this one is, when we planted it, it was a variety that was, the tag said 14 to 18 inches. They're always kind of vague. It depends on how much sunlight, how the soil is. But this one popped up this spring, so the homeowner decided to leave it, and it literally has gotten 4 feet tall, and it's spread about 6 feet. This is one plant. So this one, it's definitely in the wrong spot for this garden. It's way too big for this space. So what will happen with this is we're going to cut it back, dig it up, stick it back in a pot, and then next spring we'll replant it where it's more at the back of a border, so we can take advantage of the height of it. But again, a dahlia in the right condition will come back another year. And this has happened multiple times in this garden. It's just funny that this one has such a sprawl on it. So from here we'll move on to another spot. Climbing up through that. Let me make sure this is milkweed, because I'm not seeing any.
Be careful, you got bees on your back all over.
Oh, that's okay. I don't mind. Okay. Yeah, it's climbing milkweed. It's got pods. All right, we're starting over for this. Let me get that on my system.
You need a shot of whiskey.
Yeah.
I'll put that in.
2 shots. So this summer has just been the perfect storm of everything for weeds. The weeds have been terrible everywhere. Everybody's complaining. It seems like it doesn't matter how much pre-emergent anyone put down, how much time they're spending in the yard, the weeds have just taken over. This one is climbing milkweed. You can actually see the little milkweed pods, just like on your native milkweed that grows in a prairie that the butterflies love. But this plant is totally a pain in this garden. So it has taken over this beautiful weeping redbud. So we want to reclaim our redbud by literally just ripping this out so we can actually see the redbud. Also in here we have another small issue going on. It's this guy. So this is also a redbud. This is a sucker coming up from the root ball of the graft for this redbud. So anytime you get a sucker coming up on one of your ornamentals, you want to prune it out. I'm just going to do that because it'll take the energy away from this. Some of the other plants that will have suckers as well, flowering crab apples that are grafted will do that. I have a contorted hazelnut, Harry Lauder's walking stick, beautiful tree, but every summer I have to go in and cut all the suckers off from around the base so that the strength of the tree does its thing without being compromised. So again, we want to get all of this milkweed out of here, which there's a lot. We'll be here for a while doing that. But then I want to go in and just cut the sucker off at the base. Of course, it's being held on by that too. So what we'll do as we go through this garden is we'll just clean all of this out. But what you don't want is these weeds to take over to where they compromise the integrity of the tree, or like here, it's already opened up so the foliage on the tree isn't filled in because the milkweed was shading it, and it doesn't allow the plant to do its own thing. So it's produced a lot of seeds. Where the seeds are, basically means it had really good flowering this spring. And the nice thing about this climbing milkweed, which is, I guess, the only nice thing, the pollinators love it. There's tons of bumblebees, honeybees, all of that on it. So it served a purpose even as a weed, but now it's time to go. So that's what you need to know about climbing milkweed and the weeds, and also taking care of your ornamentals. Okay. Another plant that has a great bloom in the spring, early summer is this one that you're seeing right here. It's in the lamb's ear family, which is the white fuzzy perennial a lot of people are familiar with. This one is called Humelostachys. Big name for a small plant, but beautiful bloom. But when it gets done blooming, it looks ratty. So this one is the same way. If you just go in, take your head shears, whack it back. I like to cut things always in the shape of a mushroom. I just like that shape in a garden, and then that way it makes the foliage look good, and then if it's going to rebloom, it's going to rebloom on a nice compact kind of rounded shape. Good sharp shears are the trick too. And I don't really care too much about getting things specifically above leaf junctions with these perennials because they're tough. They figure it out on their own. So this one goes from looking like that to just a more neater, compact look for the rest of the summer. By trimming that back, the plant will not put its energy into going into seed. It's going to try to put its energy into reflowering, like what this one's trying to do. So if you can imagine, just like the daylilies, by cutting the seed heads off, then it increases the flower production if it's something that's going to reflower. So these guys, you'll get a secondary bloom with them. It's not nearly as beautiful or as intense as it is in the spring, early summer, but you can rejuvenate the plant, make it look better, and then get some secondary bloom. There's another plant that we don't have in this garden called Perennial blue salvia. There are a lot of varieties of it, very popular plant, East Friesland, Maynite, Blue Hill. That's another one that is a great low maintenance perennial, in that it'll give you 3 times the color if you just cut it back when it's done blooming the first time. If you don't cut it back, it looks really weedy and ratty, And a lot of people say, oh, I don't want that in my garden because it looks ratty. But again, give it a good tight haircut just like this, and you'll get new bloom and new growth with it. There's a variety over here, this tall blue one, that is absolutely beautiful. That's Victoria Blue Annual Salvia. That one is a true annual. Sometimes you will get a little bit of reseeding with it, but the color is spectacular and absolutely worth putting in. One thing I learned years ago, and I do this just kind of quietly, but I ask the plants to go to sleep before I give them a haircut. It's just I don't know, might sound like a weird thing, but it's just an appreciation for the life and the energy that the plants in the garden have. So I do that. You're not going to see me do that, but that's just one of the things I do. And I want to come over and talk about an annual vine, because the topic of morning glories came up today. So I'll talk about morning glories a little bit, but we'll talk about this one first. So this is an annual. Believe it or not, this went in as one little tiny plant in the spring. It's called Thunbergia or Black-Eyed Susan vine. This is one of the many colors that it comes in. It comes from a light yellow to a pink to orange to this. I just love this color. I think it's beautiful. The nice thing about it is it grows up, but as you can see, it also, one little vine, it's just taken over this whole bed. It's even growing in the boxwood. It's everywhere. This needs a little bit of a maintenance haircut. We'll probably go through and trim all of this up just to encourage the blooming up here. But a good annual that gives you a lot of color, just an alternative to the other, like morning glories. So with morning glories, that topic came up earlier. So yes, people love morning glories, or they don't like them. I tend to love them. I absolutely love the heavenly blue. The trick with those is you buy them as a seed pack in the spring. The seeds are extremely hard. You need to take a coarse grit sandpaper and abrade the seed, break that seed coat with sandpaper, just rub them several times, and then soak them overnight to allow them to sprout, and then plant them. If you just take the seeds and put them in the ground, chances are they're not going to come up well for you. So you could do the same, have the same effect on a light post or a trellis with morning glories. But the trick with that is, again, you have to abrade that seed coat to get them to sprout. Sometimes morning glories will come back on their own when the seed drops. And I do see that with a lot of the wild varieties. And heavenly blue is just a cultivar of that. But the native ones or the wild ones will come back up without any attention whatsoever. And then we'll move on to another piece of the garden. Along the lines of what we were talking about earlier with the ageratum, where it went to seed and came back on its own, this is another plant that we added to this garden years ago. So these are remnants of that plant. This is Cleome, or spider flower is another name for it. Cleomes have a very small black seed, and it's an extremely prolific plant. So the flowers are here, whites, pinks, purples. This was a dwarf variety that went in, so literally they bloomed about this tall. This is kind of reverting. It's getting a little bit back to the more wild state. But these guys, where the flowers were, these are all full of seeds. And so these aren't quite ready yet. But when the seeds dry out, or the seed pods dry out, these are full of hundreds of seeds. And basically, if you took them and just threw them anywhere, they're going to be in that spot next year. So it's a neat plant that will always be there. Once you have it, you'll always have a few come back, if not a lot of them. I really like it because it's just an airy, soft plant, has a really interesting fragrance to the foliage, and just adds another layer to the garden. And while we're here, we'll talk a little bit about what you're seeing back here. So this magnolia is a Bracken's Brown Beauty magnolia. A lot of big word for the tree. But as the season goes on, the backs of the leaves have a brown, kind of fuzzy coating. Great evergreen foliage, waxy, great to cut, take in at Christmas for wreaths or centerpieces, table arrangements. But the other neat thing about it is what you're seeing here, these are the seed pods. So with the seed pod, that's formed because where each of these seed pods now are was a giant white flower that when it opens during the spring, summer, and fall, smells like lemon pledge. Extremely fragrant. Honeybees love it. Pollinators love it. And so it goes from the flower form to the seed head, which are these guys. And they're going to continue to turn color to be a bright red as the season goes on. Before then they drop off on the ground. And I'll take a walk around. Maybe we'll find one that is still in, a bloom that's still blooming. The nice thing about brackens is they don't bloom all their flowers at once like an Ann or a Jane magnolia or a star, the ones you're familiar with in the spring. These are kind of like random 5 or 6 blooms here, 5 or 6 blooms there, but they'll continue to do that spring, summer, and fall, which makes it a really interesting plant. Definitely interesting. This guy, so these are, if you remember the video from earlier this spring, the Allium giganticums. So these, when they were in full flower, are a giant purple ball-shaped flower. We leave them in this garden because it just still adds interest and structure, a little bit of whimsy to the garden. And so all of these have gone to seed. The seeds are dropping to the ground. We do get new babies that'll pop up from them. But pretty soon these will be where they're just like this, where they're so weak, they're ready to come off. And so we'll just take them out for the fall. That was perfect on that. And I'll move around. I'll see if I can find one of these that's flowering so you can see what it looks like. Thank you for joining Brooks and Roots today with the Brainscapers. We're again in this beautiful garden. Just wanted to show you another stage of the development from spring bulbs through annuals to a little bit of the maintenance with it, of what it takes. But again, a fabulous garden, just so many different layers to it. So thank you again, and we will see you next time. Please like and subscribe and share it with your friends if you like. And also give us your topics on what you want to know about. If there's anything in particular, happy to give you our information, our advice, whatever we can do to make your garden better. Thank you, thank you. Have a great week.